This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Jay Hewitt. He's a pastor, author, and IRONMAN triathlete. He actually completed an IRONMAN triathlon while undergoing treatment for terminal brain cancer. So he writes about all of this in his book called I Am Weak, I Am Strong, Building a Resilient Faith for a Resilient Life. So if you know anything about my show, you know the word resilient, that just like appeals to my brain. But this is a tremendous story of resilience in this book. And the book certainly does get practical as well. It doesn't just kind of stay out there in the memoir world. But it's a practical story of a guy who got this terrible news in his late 30s, and he could have just rolled over and literally died. Or just rolled over and stopped really paying attention and stopped, we'll just kind of let these pills do what they do and the surgery do what they do, and then we'll just kind of figure it out. But he ran to God in this moment, but he also ran to resilience. And so we go through all of the story of like, okay, he gets sick. Now what? Okay, what about surgery? Okay, he decides he's going to do an Ironman triathlon, which in terms of endurance races is one of the hardest things that any human being could possibly put themselves through, much less doing it while undergoing, chemotherapy, radiation, post-cancer surgery. So we get into all of those details, why he did it, what the motivation was, setbacks that he experienced during training, setbacks that he experienced because he was trying to run this race during COVID. And, these races were going to be outside, but, remember back in 2020 and all those different times where it was like, we pretended like COVID was going to track you down like a heat-seeking missile and go up your nose at the time. And so he has all these races canceled that he's been training for. And, what do you do whenever you have an injury? Like, how do you, keep going towards your goal, but then coming backwards? And how are you going to do a race when they're not actually holding races? Guys, we get into all of that information in this podcast, so I don't want to actually ruin the story for you. So come along on that journey with us. So without further ado, let's get into it. Jay Hewitt, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, we got a lot of ground to cover today, so let's just go ahead and jump right on in, because at a very early age, you and I have kind of a similar story in that we got obsessed with a particular type of exercise. But I will say that I got it on a different side. So I got obsessed with like pro wrestlers, and my dad told me like, look, you don't just get muscles and get to keep them. You have to like keep doing stuff in order to like keep them and get them and all that. But as far as I understand it, when you were 10 or 11 years old, this is back in the late 80s, you saw Ironman athletes for the first time. And so similar to what Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage were for me, these Ironman athletes were for you. So take me through that.
Yeah, brother. Well, first I got to say, I was right there with you with the WWF at that time.
That's
before
right.
It was WWE.
That's
I was
right.
all about it. But you're asking me about Ironman. Yeah, when I was 10 years old, watching Wide World of Sports, Ironman Triathlon came on, and I thought there was no way. When I was watching and I was learning, because I'd never heard of it before, and when I heard that these athletes were doing 140 miles nonstop, they were swimming, they were cycling, they were running, I just thought these people are superhuman. They're not normal.
Yeah.
And, at that point I was 10 years old, not in a real healthy home environment. So at that point I didn't think, oh, I want to become an Ironman. That wasn't on my radar at all, but I was just so impressed that guys could do that.
So tell me, like, was it something where you were like, okay, sorry, I got to back up on my own question. So when I got obsessed with WWF and all those guys, like I had the wrestling buddies, like I was jumping off my bed and like elbow dropping. I was like doing Superfly Jimmy Snuka stuff off my roof onto the grass and things like that. So did you think like, okay, I'm going to go emulate that now? Or was it just like a cool thing to see, to be like, yeah, I had no idea people even did such stuff?
I did not emulate it whatsoever. It was so beyond me. It wasn't even in my realm of thinking that I could do something like that as a 10-year-old. It was just like, wow, look at those guys. Good for them. But never came back into my brain until quite a while later in my life.
Okay, so we'll certainly get there. So we started fun. Now we need to start kind of, get into the not so fun stuff. So you actually detail this in your book, which is a fantastic book. I Am Weak, I Am Strong, guys. It will be there in the show notes. We're not going to be able to cover everything here on the podcast today, so you can go to the show notes and pick up your own copy of the book there. But, as you age, and you can kind of give us the ages and age ranges and things like that, but something was starting to go wrong with your health. There was some confusion there at the very beginning. And here you are in your late 30s, and all of a sudden you're getting some bad news. So let's talk about your late 30s, kind of how you were feeling, and then kind of what ended up happening with your health.
Yeah. So out of nowhere, I had a seizure. never had a seizure before, didn't know what hit me. But that got me into the doctor, that got me into the neurologist to figure out what was going on. And I got a call on a Sunday afternoon from a neurosurgeon that I'd never met. And he told me, he said, "Hey, I'm looking at your scan right here, and it appears that you have a brain tumor, pretty significant in size, about the size of a ping pong ball." And man, when I heard that over the phone, that took my breath away. You know, I don't know how to react to that. So all I knew to ask him was like, "Is it cancer?" And he said, "I don't know yet." And I asked him, "Am I going to need brain surgery?" And he said, "Yes, if possible," because this brain tumor was right in the center of my brain, very hard to reach, very high risk if I was going to try to go through with a surgery. So yeah, getting that news, it shocks you. It was a shocking afternoon. And I went upstairs and I told my wife, and we just kind of embraced and fell on the bed. And it was like, okay, we have no choice but to face this. So let's go.
Okay. So I actually want to talk about the gap between finding out, telling your spouse, embracing, and when you got to the point to where you're just like, well, this is the hand that I was dealt. I have to play it, because I'm fairly pessimistic in my personality, and I tend to dwell on things that are negative, not on things that are positive. Things that are positive, I'm like, oh, that's great. And then I move on to the next thing. But I've gone through that same scenario in my head, having not experienced what you've experienced, but I've tried to put myself there so that I could try to pre-decide how I would react. But you know the drill, Jay. You don't know how you're going to react until you're literally in the middle of the situation. So what was the time length between like, okay, this absolutely sucks. You know, maybe you're in tears with your wife and all that, all the worst possible things that could scare a person are right there in front of you. And then how long was that gap, and kind of, you know, how long did it take you to get there? What did you do to get there? Take us through that.
Yeah. So it was probably a year that went on before I actually had my first brain surgery. I've had 3 now, but my first brain surgery took about a year because I had to fight insurance. They didn't want to pay for it.
Of course.
And, you know, a surgery like that's over $1 million. And so it's not something that you can just say, "Hey, I'll take care of it." So anyway, I had to fight insurance. And then I also had to find a surgeon that was capable of attempting this surgery because of the placement of the tumor. A lot of surgeons would call it inoperable, but I didn't give up. And that's my personality of when life is out of control. I get moving, I get busy, I start working, and that can sound good, but it's also an attempt at control. You know, I'm trying to control something I can't control, but it worked out well in this situation because I just wouldn't give up, on insurance or on surgeons. And then finally I got to a neurosurgeon up in San Francisco that he specialized in surgery in this placement. And so he was willing to attempt the surgery for me.
Okay. So take me through this. So 1 year of waiting, typically my experience with family members or loved ones that have gotten cancer is they get a diagnosis, and treatment or surgery typically starts almost immediately, depending upon the severity of what's happening. So, I mean, a year waiting around knowing that you essentially have a time bomb in the middle of your head. Like how do you deal with that? And even just from a practical health perspective, were there any deleterious things happening because it was, you know, taking so long to get this thing going?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the main symptom that I was dealing with was seizure. And so I was having, I don't know, maybe 5-6 seizures a day. And that's pretty debilitating as far as, your capacity to work and even decision making. And, you know, the interesting thing is, I've had some people ask me about prayer, and during that year, I couldn't pray much, you know, because it takes quite a bit of mental focus to really pray. But fortunately, I had a great faith community around me, and I had a lot of people praying on my behalf. And I had to kind of lean on that, to find the peace that can only come from Christ. So
when you say you had these people praying for you, I'm working through Acts right now, and you know we're going through different parts where like people were praying for Peter and praying for Paul after his conversion and stuff like that. Were they praying instead of you? Were they praying with you? Is it kind of one of those things where it's like, you know, you got so down in the dumps, maybe you're so depressed that prayer wasn't even on your mind? Like, tell me a little bit more about that, because, you know, some people, when things go poorly, they run away from God. That's kind of my MO, because I'm so mad, I'm going to go over here and fix it on my own, and then I'll show you God, kind of a thing. And so like prayer typically doesn't work into my equation. What was it like for you?
Yeah. So I was having difficulty praying, not because of depression, but because of the seizures, because of the mental load, of having seizures. It was hard to focus, to pray. And so people, were praying on my behalf in place of me. So my prayer life wasn't full at that point, but I had other people lifting me up. And I don't know for our time together, it might be helpful to fast forward. And, that's a great thing about the book. You have time to unfold things. But after that first surgery, they were able to biopsy the tumor, because at first, it's in a lot of cancerous situations or tumor situations, when you're figuring out if it's benign or malignant, they take a biopsy. But with brain tumors, there's a skull in the way. So you can't just poke a needle in there to get some tissue. So I went into the first surgery not knowing if it was cancerous or not. And then after that first surgery, that's when I discovered that it was cancerous. And I got the diagnosis with the prognosis. And that's the moment where I really had to decide, am I going to turn to God or turn away from him? Because it's at that point where you can start to ask the questions, why me? You can start placing blame, and you can blame God for things like this. And as a pastor, I've watched people in crisis. That's the moment where they turn and they walk away. I think I had already dealt with a lot of that when my dad passed away, and there's a lot of anger and a lot of blame, but God was so gracious with me during that point, so that now when I'm facing my own personal crisis of my own personal health, I was able to turn to him pretty quickly, almost like a reflex. And I turned to him in prayer was my first connection point with him.
And so when you find out that it's cancer, what was the prognosis initially?
Yeah, so it was also terminal and chronic, and they gave me 6 to 10 years.
6 to 10 years, and when was this?
I was 36.
Okay, and so how old are you now? I'm just wondering how long ago you got the prognosis.
Yeah, I'm 42.
Okay, and so with that, let's just kind of go ahead and speed up to your recovery, and then we'll get into the in-between, and we'll spend a lot of time there. So you said 3 surgeries, right? So yes. You've had 3 surgeries. What is kind of your prognosis now? Like what do the doctors feel about your situation, kind of where you're currently at?
Yeah, so now I'm in the middle of that prognosis span. However, my last visit with my neuro-oncologist, she was able to say, because my last surgery was so successful, that I almost get to restart with that prognosis. So,
okay.
So that extends past quite a bit.
Okay, very good. Well, that's certainly good news, considering some of the news that a lot of people get and that those doctors have to deliver to those people. But I want to turn now to a conversation that you had with your daughter. So this is while you're in the middle of your fight, you're receiving your treatment, trying to take care of this issue, and you tell your daughter that you are going to do an Ironman triathlon and do it for her. So take us through just that initial part. Well, first of all, not everyone knows exactly what an Ironman is. So describe exactly what you were telling your daughter that you were going to be doing for her and in honor of her. But just tell us, where did you get the idea to do all of this? Let's just start there.
All right. So an Ironman is a triathlon, swim, bike, run. You swim 2.5 miles, and then you get out of the water, get right on a bike, and you do a 112-mile ride. And then when you're done with that, you top it off with a marathon. So it's 140.6 miles, and it has to be done in under 17 hours. So it's pretty intense. It's a gold standard of an endurance race. So how that came about, where that idea came from, was really that moment where I had to choose: am I going to turn to God, or am I going to turn away from him? And I chose to turn to him, and I prayed, and it was just a very matter-of-fact prayer of, God, what are you doing? This doesn't make sense, because, I just planted a new church that was thriving, doing really well, have a young daughter. Things are going well, and it seems like he's working in my life. And it just made no sense to me that at this point in life, I would get hit hard with a terminal illness. So I was confused. So I asked him, I said, what are you doing? So I sought the Lord. He heard me and he answered me. And through the Holy Spirit, just like Jesus promised and described, the Holy Spirit reminds us of the teachings of Jesus. The Holy Spirit spoke to me through scripture. It's like my heart, my mind, my soul were all directed to 2 Corinthians 12, 9, and 10, where Paul has this, there's different ideas of what's going on in Paul's life. But for my purposes, I've seemed to bonded with the interpretation that he has some kind of mysterious illness, a thorn in his side. And he's prayed 3 times for it to be removed. 3 is the number of completion that we find throughout the biblical text. So he prayed until there was nothing left to pray about. And God's response to his request that it be removed was simply no. But God went on to so kindly tell him, but my grace will be sufficient because my power is perfected in weakness. And then Paul concluded, well, then when I'm weak, then I'm strong. And so as my heart and my soul were taking to this scripture, I concluded the exact same thing. Okay, what is God doing? He's about to demonstrate his power through my weakness. He's going to show me what it means that his grace can sustain me through something like this. And so I concluded, okay, well then when I'm weak, then I'm strong. And after I prayed that prayer, then I prayed the next prayer, which is so pivotal. Okay, how can I cooperate? How can I join you in what you're doing? And, I'm pretty clear that the Lord spoke to me with what he was doing. How I could join him, I'd more call it a nudge of the Holy Spirit. Felt this nudge from the Holy Spirit saying, hey, you have an opportunity here. You have an opportunity to show your daughter what resilient faith looks like. And you have an opportunity to show her that the promises of God are real and reliable. And I got this idea, what if I attempt something that I never thought I could do at my best, and I attempt it at my worst? And out of nowhere, like I said, I hadn't really thought about Ironman in, 30 years. And this idea popped in my head. What if I did Ironman? Something that I saw when I was 10 years old, and I thought, there's no way. These people are superhuman. I could never do that. What if I attempted that while I was going through cancer treatment? So the idea was my daughter would be able to watch me get up and get out and train, even when I want to stay in bed, so she can see that resilience. And then she could also see me cross the finish line and see me do something that would be impossible on my own. Probably impossible if I was just at my best, but definitely impossible when I'm at my worst. And I thought, well, if I do this, and if she's my motivation and I dedicate my race to her, not only do I get to show her what resilient faith looks like, I also get to provide a grand gesture of love to say, honey, this is for you. And when all of those pieces came together in a very short amount of time, this is a prayer that lasted 30 seconds. I made the decision, I'm going to do this. I ran it by my wife. I ran it by a pastor that I greatly respect. And then I told my daughter, I said, her name is Hero. I said, Hero, I'm going to do an Ironman, and I'm going to do it in your honor. And from that point, there's no turning back.
Yeah, certainly. If you tell her something like that, that's not like saying, hey, we're going to go get ice cream this afternoon. Like this is something that you pretty much have to dedicate yourself to. But take me through the process now of, okay, I've heard about people going couch to 5K. I've even heard about people going couch to, marathon. Nobody does, couch to Murph. No one goes couch to Ironman triathlon. This requires training and planning and meal plans and diets and changes. Tell me about that process. But also, I remember when Stuart Scott was going through his cancer fight, the former SportsCenter anchor. And I remember seeing him doing like MMA training and MMA style workouts. And I just, in my head, I was like, wait a minute. I thought that when you're going through like, you post-cancer surgery or radiation or chemo, that you've got to be basically in a bubble, because like if someone sneezes within a half mile of you, then you're probably going to die. I just remember like thinking like, how's he able to do this? So take me through and disabuse me of any of that ignorance of like what you're able to do and capable of doing post-cancer surgery, but while also undergoing radiation and chemo.
Yeah. So I passed it by my doctors first. And they said, yeah, this is good. The more you can exercise during treatment, the better. It strengthens your body. You can recover more. Now, okay. I don't know if they knew how intense training for Ironman would be. And I don't think I did either.
Yeah.
When I made this decision, we did not know how intense it was. But regardless, they said, yeah, go for it. And so coming out of surgery, they give you about a month to recover before your body's strong enough to endure radiation and chemotherapy. And so I rested during that recovery time for a month. And then on day one of radiation and chemotherapy, I ran a mile. And each day I would go in, I would run a little further and a little further. And so pretty soon I was up to 10 miles. And at 10 miles, I had a seizure. And I thought, okay, grand experiment over. Because in the back of my head, I know that the scripture is about spiritual things, not necessarily about physical things. But I saw this as such a great metaphor to demonstrate the spiritual. So I just thought, I got to the 10 miles and I thought, well, this was silly. This was foolishness. My body can't do this. So I went to my doctor and I said, hey, like, what do you say? And my doctor said, well, just back off a little bit. So the next day I went and I ran 10 miles, just a little slower, and my body was able to do it. And then I just kept pushing, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just, during that time, I was like, okay, I know to run a marathon, people train 20 miles. And so I'm going to see if I can work my way up to 20 miles, just adding a mile each day. And my body was able to do it. And then once I could do that, then I added swimming, because I had no idea how to swim. And that was difficult on my body. And then cycling, again, so difficult on my body. But I just kept adding a little more and a little more. That was my game plan. But it wasn't until I had to start doing what's called brick training, where you're not just running, you're not just swimming, you're not just cycling, you're doing those things together. That's when I needed a plan. And it was so crazy the way that God works. One thing that I learned, and I talk about this in the book, is that whenever I pray for help, God seems to respond by sending me someone. And so I've learned when I need help and I just have one of those like urgent, like, God help, I open my eyes to see who he's sending to me at any particular point. And so I got into the brick training. My body wasn't handling it. And I prayed for help. And then within a couple of days, I got a call from this guy that I'd met one time in Idaho. I'm out in California, Southern California. A guy from Idaho calls me and says, hey, I was on a run today and I thought of you. I was running with a woman who competes at the world championship level of Ironman. She's a breast cancer survivor and she's starting to coach people. I told her about you and she wants to coach you. And so now I found myself with a coach who competes at the top level of what I'm trying to do and understands what it is to go through cancer treatment. And she was the one that was able to craft my workouts. She followed me by my sports watch that would also give her vitals of my body. And she knew when I needed to back off and when I needed to push. And she modified workouts for me. And so if it wasn't for her giving me that training program and modifying it, one of her axioms was always, the hardest part of Ironman is getting to the starting line healthy, because the training's so intense. But she got me to the start line healthy.
Hey guys, real quick. If you're anything like me, you are constantly on the lookout for high quality products that are actually made here in America by American hands. The problem is that a lot of American companies have outsourced their labor overseas, so it's an American company, but it's supporting people that don't live here. So I've always wanted to partner with an American company that prioritizes America, American workers, and making all of their materials here in this country. That's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Origin. Origin is an apparel company based in Maine, and they are focused on getting as much manufacturing back to the United States as they can possibly do. What do they make? They make the best jiu-jitsu gis on the planet. And these are the only jiu-jitsu gis that are made completely in America. They also make jeans. Yes, they're stretchy and awesome. They also make amazing hunting gear. And I know you guys love your Kuiu and your Sitka, but those companies use overseas labor, and they don't do that to help you guys out. They do that to increase their profit margins. Origin also makes boots and work boots, and yes, that does include steel-toe boots. And in the fall of last year, they launched a line of everyday clothing. Their Versa pants are their everyday pants, and they are just especially phenomenal. They also make other outdoor clothes and workout clothes, and they're launching new apparel stuff all the time. If you haven't already, you need to check them out and support a company that supports America and America's workers. Try Origin out today by going to www.originusa.com. That's originusa.com. Use the promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. Again, that's originusa.com. Promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. And that's such a tremendous asset. You know, I'm connected to a lot of people in the MMA community, and that's the same thing. But their thing is like, you never get to the fight. You never get to fight night healthy. So you just try to get there as healthy as possible. And so I'm sure even for you, you certainly had to have had some setbacks. It's impossible seemingly to train for an Ironman at any age with any type of genetic predisposition without some significant setbacks. So take us through some of those setbacks, and then also go ahead and just tell us, what's the worst part? Like, do you hate the biking more or the running more? Because it's always, different distances. Some people are really good in the water. They're like fish. So, what were the bad times like? But then also, what's the crappiest part? What did you hate the most?
Well, I think specifically for Ironman, the crappiest part's got to be the run because it's at the end.
Yeah.
So to just go do a 120-mile warm up before starting a marathon, that's a brutal marathon, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
That's got to be. I enjoy running. That's the only thing I'd done before. I wasn't an athlete. I didn't play varsity sports or anything like that, even in high school. But I would run occasionally, and so I was most comfortable with running. Swimming was the hardest to learn. Obviously, I could keep my head above water, but the first time I went out for a swim, I did 100 meters and I was gassed. Yeah. I was so tired. And I thought, how am I going to do 3,200 meters if I can't even do 100? And I thought there's no way. But again, I prayed and I said, God help. And here comes a guy from my church. He was a Division I swimmer, swam with Michael Phelps, and he knew what he was doing. He took off work early every day to meet me at the pool, teach me how to swim. So that was brutal to start with, but the cycling was the part that my body couldn't handle, because one of the byproducts of chemotherapy is muscle strains. And so to be on a bike, you're out for 4 hours training, doing 100+ miles, and you're stationary, and your hamstrings just over and over are pumping the same motion. And so I had some big muscle strains, which then, because I'm on chemo, the recovery from that was really difficult, and the recovery was slow, which was scary because my race that I'd already signed up for in Australia was getting closer and closer, and I wasn't able to be out training. And so I was freaking out. Like, am I going to be ready for this thing? And then it also freaked me out too in training to be dealing with muscle strains, because Ironman, like, one of their favorite things to do is to show highlight reels of elite athletes crawling across the finish line, because they cramp up somewhere along, and then by sheer willpower, they just crawl across the finish line. And I'm thinking, my body's not going to be able to handle it. I can give myself the best nutrition and hydration, but with chemotherapy in my system, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. But so it was a huge mental strain during training to be experiencing these strains and thinking, what's the point of continuing to train if I'm not even able to go 100 miles on a bike, and I need to do 112 plus a marathon? So it was difficult. I had setbacks during the race as well, but that was the training.
Well, so with the training, it's funny that you brought up Michael Phelps and all that. So I remember after this would have been the 2008 Olympics, when Phelps won all his gold medals, 8 gold medals or whatever. I was like, you know what? I'm motivated. Let's go swimming. I'm a good athlete, and I'm in good shape and all that. And I go to our pool at our university, and I go from one end of the pool to the other, and I'm like, this is the dumbest thing in the world. No one should do this. Like, why do people do this to themselves? And I kept trying and I kept going. It's like, all right, I guess I'm just not going to be a swimmer. And I kind of moved on. But you obviously pushed through all of that. You had some resilience to go through all of that. But you mentioned you signed up for a race in 2019 in Australia, and that was postponed. And then you signed up for a race in Santa Rosa in 2020, also postponed. So tell me where you go from there, because I just got to imagine. I mean, again, I'm keep thinking about this for whatever reason in an MMA context, because the training for both is so brutal. But you get a fight, it's on the calendar, then the fighter pulls out, and then they push you to another day. And you're like, okay, so let me hit the reset button. Let me start my recovery, and then I'll restart my training camp, and then I'll go like that. But for an Ironman to have it postponed twice and not know when we're actually going to do the damn thing, like, what was that like?
Yeah. It was so, like, you talk about that resiliency of mind. I kept having these ideas of, like, that was such a stupid idea. Like, of course.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Especially when you start equating it with that you're being led by God.
Sure. Yeah.
Because people get that wrong a lot.
Yeah.
And I've gotten it wrong in the past. And so when you're trying to do something like this and you feel led by God, but then, you're getting injured, then races are getting canceled. And you mentioned 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020. Here comes COVID, and the pandemic sweeps through and everything shuts down. You mentioned in the beginning your idea of somebody going through cancer having to be in this bubble.
Yeah.
Well, that was the truth. Now, all of a sudden, I'm at high risk because of my sickness, my illness. And so now all my training partners are pulling out. So now I'm solo. They don't want to be around me. And so because they don't want to be responsible for getting me sick. And so I'm solo. I'm training all on my own. The help that I had wasn't there. And then, there's more stress being put on my family. And honestly, this was the hardest on a heart level and mentally. So I'm doing this whole thing for my daughter, for my family. But once 2020 hits and everything shuts down, my wife is a professor. So now she's at home and she is lecturing from home. And my daughter, who would have been at school, is now at home as well. And instead of me being home pitching in, I'm out riding my bike. I'm out training and just leaving it all on them. And so I had to really think, all right, did I get this wrong? Because there's now so much stress being put on my family as a result of what I'm attempting to do. And then Ironman starts canceling races because Australia said, no, you can't hold a race here. And California said, no, you can't hold a race here. And I got a call from Ironman. At that point, I was an Ironman sponsored athlete. And so they called me and they said, hey, we haven't made the announcement yet, but we're going to cancel all of our races worldwide. And they said, one race that we've never canceled before is our world championships in Kona, Hawaii. But if you remember back then, Hawaii was really locked down. Right. And so there was no way Hawaii was going to allow them to hold their race. And so I got this call, everything's shutting down. And I thought, okay, well, then that answers that. This obviously wasn't from the Lord. It's time to back out. But they said to me, hey, we want you to do the world championship. I was like, well, I didn't qualify for that. They said, yeah, honorary. And I said, but that's canceled as well. And they said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to have our first ever full distance, virtual race. I was like, how's that work? And, all of us are competing with sport watches on smartwatches. And they said, well, you have an app, it'll attach to your Garmin and, you'll plan your own 140-mile course. And we'll track it via the app and the watch, and you'll compete against everybody that way. And I remember thinking, I can't do that. Because I've never been to an Ironman race, and now I have to plan my own. I don't know what a transition zone looks like. I don't know what an aid station is. And now not only do I have to plan a route, 140-mile route, that I can do, but it's the other pieces, permits, support, for me, having a paramedic available, all of these things just seemed impossible. And so, I told him, I said, well, let me talk to my wife, which, that's good man code for, I'm not going to do this. It gives you an out.
Yeah.
So I thought, because so much stress had been placed on my wife, I thought, yeah, we'll have this conversation, but this isn't going to happen. But when I talked to her, she said, I think you should do it. And it really took me by surprise. She said, Jay, if you can plan your own course, we can put the finish line right in front of our house. She said, Hero watches you train. Cause I had a running route, a genius running training route. It was only a 3-mile loop that I would just do over and over because I always had a bathroom, because I'd come by my house every 3 miles. Yeah. And so it was smart. So my daughter would watch me pass by the house every 3 miles. And she said, that's important to Hero. And now if she can watch you cross the finish line out in front of our house, that's gonna cement that memory. And she also said, it was a cute idea to go out to Australia and make it a trip for the whole family. But she said, your community is here and people will be able to support you if you do it at home. And when she said those two things, I thought, okay, let's go. And so I called Ironman back and said, yeah, count me in. We're going to do this thing. Fortunately for me, at this point, there's a documentary crew that's following me. And so I've got a full crew with, directors and producers and all of that stuff. And so they put one of their producers on the race. So there was a producer that handled all the permitting, all of those things, so that was a weight taken off of my shoulders, which was very, very fortunate.
Okay, very good. So obviously everybody had to get really creative during 2020 because everything got really stupid there for a little bit. And so you're doing this process. Luckily, you've got some people that are helping you. Luckily, you got somebody helping you with the permitting, figuring out the track, figuring out all the aid stations, all those types of things. But I remember a buddy looking at me like I was crazy because I told him that I train, powerlifting or all the training I do that alone and I don't listen to music while I do it. He's like, are you a serial killer? Like, do I need to be concerned? Like you work out without anybody around. Like, so there's, you don't get that little ego boost because, somebody's on the other side of the gym, maybe looking at you, seeing what you're deadlifting that day. So the idea, Jay, of like doing this alone, like without any people, like, come on, man, you can do it, or smacking you on the bottom on the way by, say, that camaraderie you get from doing any kind of race with other people, whether it's a Tough Mudder or an Ironman or anything like that. Like, that had to absolutely suck. Or did it? I'm just assuming that it did, but it sounds like it would be terrible.
Yes. Yeah. Like you're pointing out, there's a certain amount of, when other athletes are there, it's motivational. It keeps you going. The pure competition comes out of you when you're competing against others. And now, I'm alone, I'm solo, and with all my doubts, and anytime I'm going to be thinking, maybe I should just quit. Maybe I should just give up on this. I'm on my own. But what I also learned during the training, because during 2020, I was training alone. So it's kind of like the Lord was preparing me for that. And so I learned how to find some gratitude in the solitude, where swimming was the worst to learn, but then it became my favorite to do. Because I would meditate on the Lord's Prayer every time I would swim, and I felt myself growing spiritually, even while I was in the trenches of training, and then cycling as well. When I'd be out on a long ride by myself, that was some of the best time to process through all of the emotion that came along with a terminal illness. And I was able to at that point, through prayer, I was able to pray during that point, really make some headway into my own mental health as I was also boosting my physical health. But then the run, man, the run is just brutal and terrible. And when you're doing that on your own, makes it even more difficult. Absolutely.
So it's interesting to see how much mental training you went through, which, guys, obviously, if any of you have ever done anything difficult physically, there's a tremendous mental component to it as well. But we always talk about cultivating spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. And it sounds like you were really sharpening all of those knives as you were going through this training. But let's just get to race day. So it's race day. You got to get this thing done in under 17 hours, and just take us through the race. Where did you start? When did you start? Like, what was race day like?
Yeah. So 4 a.m., the alarm clock goes off. I put my feet on the ground and pray.
Were you
God
able to sleep,
Jay?
Were you able to sleep the night before? I can't imagine you got a good night's sleep. There's no way.
No, I was able to. I was, yeah.
Okay.
Through this whole thing, God has just given me such a peace, and I slept well the night before my surgeries. Slept well the night before my race. So yeah, I get up at 4:30. It's dark out. I come downstairs. I eat a poke bowl. That was my morning nutrition routine. So had some raw fish and white rice, and got in a van and went to Newport Beach. So Pacific Ocean, you have to do an open water swim. And so I went down there, and the producer had set up an opening ceremony. Ironman, they do an epic opening ceremony and a party afterwards. And I was really bummed that I wouldn't be able to experience that. But the producer put together an opening ceremony. A good friend of mine, a pastor, was flown in to do that opening ceremony. And there's probably about 100, 150 people that were there before the sun came up to support me. And after that opening ceremony, I went to the start line, and everybody came around and countdown 3, 2, 1. When they hit 1, my wife and daughter had an air horn, and they hit the air horn. And as that sounded, I pressed start on my watch, and I charged down to the Pacific Ocean, jumped in. It was freezing cold, woke me right up. And I started heading out for that 2.5 mile swim. And there was this moment where I'm swimming alongside the pier, and all my friends had run over there, and same with my wife and my daughter. And as I'm swimming, my head comes up, and I go to take a breath, and I can see my daughter, and we lock eyes, and we both knew it. You know, that moment when you have a connection with somebody with eye contact, and you both know,
oh yeah,
although there's people all over the place, it's just me and you. So we could tell. And she waved at me, and I was at the perfect point in my stroke where my hand was coming out of the water. And I waved back at her. Yeah. And she started jumping up and down. Now, the night before, the Lord gave me another scripture, Nehemiah 8:10, might be 10:8. It's been a while. Anyway, the joy of the Lord is your strength. And I went into that day thinking, all right, I am going to give gratitude for every moment of this race and watch it transition into strength. And so when my daughter waved at me and started jumping up and down, I thanked the Lord. God, this is amazing that I get to do this for my daughter. And I could feel myself just well up with strength in that moment. And the more I gave thanks, the stronger I felt throughout the day. So I got out of the water 2.5 miles in, and I felt good. I truly felt like it was a good warm up, and I was ready to go. I jumped on the bike, and I head out, and it's, the sun is just starting to rise at that point. And I realized at that moment, people travel from all over the world to cycle Pacific Coast Highway up the west coast of California. And this is what I get to do. And it's a perfect day. I get to watch the sunrise. I get to watch how the light reflects back off of the Pacific Ocean. And it turned out to be a 74-degree day. So as I'm riding, it's just perfect conditions, and I'm loving it. Some other really amazing moments on that bike that I detail in the book, but won't get into it for the sake of time. But when I got off of the bike, I felt really strong. So now I'm, let's see, what's that, 115 miles in. And I put on my shoes, and I start for the run, and I'm planning to run 10-minute miles. Right. Which, that's not exceptionally fast at all. It's mild. It's very mild, but for a first time triathlete, it's respectable. So 10-minute miles is my plan. And the first mile, I look down at my watch, and I'm doing 8-minute miles. And I think to myself, this is literally a marathon, not a sprint. Slow down. Yeah. And so I back off my pace, and at mile 2, I check my pace, and I'm at 8.5-minute miles. And I had this really stupid thought. I thought, all right, I knew the Lord was going to teach me what his strength through my weakness really looks like. And I didn't expect this, but maybe he's turning me into something that's superhuman, spirit fueled. And I'm just going to go crush this time. Maybe I'm going to do this with 8-minute miles. And, right about that moment where I had that thought, it happened. I knew somehow, some way I was going to have to battle my cancer treatment. I didn't know how. I was most prepared for some kind of cramping. And the way that I was fighting against the cramping was through my nutrition and hydration. What I didn't know was that because of the chemotherapy, my digestive system was just trashed. And so I had all of this food and water sitting in my stomach, not being absorbed through my gut lining. Now, when you're swimming, your stomach is stationary. When you're cycling, your stomach is stationary. But once you start running, all of a sudden your stomach's moving up and down, and everything that was inside of me wasn't going to stay inside of me anymore. And from that point on, for the next couple miles, I felt like I was running with a stomach flu. And I thought, well, if it wasn't bad enough, now it's even worse. And I gave thanks for something that I went through that was difficult before. I gave thanks for this time that I climbed Mount Whitney with some friends. So Mount Whitney, the largest mountain in the United States, or contiguous, is that how you say it? Yeah. Basically not Mount Denali.
Yeah.
So anyway, all that to say, I got altitude sickness, and on the way down, I was so sick, but I was able to get back down. And I just thought, I've fought through this before. If I did it before, I can do it now. So God, thanks for giving me that experience before. Let it fuel me now and help me to press on. So I kept pressing on for a couple more miles. But the problem was I wasn't able to take anything in. I wasn't able to take a sip of water, any other nutrition. And I knew anybody, whether you're going through cancer treatment or not, a person's body cannot run a marathon without a sip of water. And I just knew I am going to cramp up. At some point, I'm going to cramp up. And I thought, if I'm 20 miles away from the finish line, I'm not going to be able to cross the finish line. No matter how much willpower I have, I cannot crawl 20 miles and make it to the finish line. And so I had to come to terms with the fact that everything that I'd done up to this point, it was all for nothing, and I wasn't going to finish this race. I had to come and find peace with the fact that I wasn't going to finish this race. And so, then it became very important to me that I was a good example for my daughter, that I'd be able to look her in the eye and say with absolute authenticity, I gave it my all to make it back home to you. Because as a guy with terminal cancer, this has become a metaphor now where I'm fighting throughout the day to make it back home. Just like now I have to fight every day to make it home to my family. And so I needed to know in my soul that even if I wasn't able to make it home that day and cross the finish line, I needed to be able to look Kiro in the eye and say, honey, I gave it my all. And so I started this new mantra in my head during that point where I just said, you have nothing to prove, just an example to set. You have nothing to prove, just an example to set, which was difficult because I knew, there's 100 people waiting for me at home. They've been waiting all day. They've been following me all day. I've got a documentary crew that's following me to document all of this. And Ironman had sent out their broadcast crew. So the crew that's normally in Kona, they were out with me, following me, and they were broadcasting me on their overall world championship race. And so it was difficult to say you have nothing to prove when you know you have that many eyes on you. But I was able to say it in my soul and mean it. But it was, you can imagine to put that much into something and to realize I'm not going to finish this race. And so I prayed the same prayer that you would pray, that anybody would pray, that really simple prayer of help, help. And then God did what God had done the whole time. He sent me someone. And so this is what happened. About the time that I prayed help, my coach who had flown out from Idaho, who'd been monitoring me by my sport watch, noticed that my vitals were not well, and she knew I was in trouble. She tracked down through the GPS where I was and where my next aid station was, and she met me there. She met me at the aid station, and she had brought her running shoes. She started running alongside of me, asking me questions that I didn't know to ask myself. I'm a rookie. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
She's world class. And so she starts asking me these questions, and she said, all right, I promised I wouldn't introduce anything new into your nutrition regimen, but I did bring this salt tablet, put it under your tongue. Let's get the sodium into your blood. We need to balance this out. And so, put the salt tablet under my tongue, and within a mile, I could feel a change. All of a sudden, I could feel what was left inside me start to absorb into my body, and my muscles to start to get the nutrients that they needed again. And when I felt that, I thought, I have a chance. I have a chance. I still have 20 miles to go, but this might actually happen. And so I thanked God for sending me this woman again. And I felt myself strengthen with that gratitude and that joy. And I pressed on. The sun was starting to set. And at that point, a police squad car pulled up behind me and turned on its spotlight and started going behind me. I'm in my community now. I'm getting closer to home. And so I'm in my home city, and there's a police officer from my city that with a squad car that's following me and lighting the way. And over the loudspeaker, they're saying to me, come on, you got this. You got this. We're with you. You got this. And then they started playing AC/DC for me over the loudspeaker, which just made
That'll
me
help
smile.
everybody. That helps
and again,
everybody.
That joy, that fuels you. So then I look back, and as I'm turning into my neighborhood, there's not just one squad car, there's 5. And it's like to have your community behind you like that is amazing. And as I come into my neighborhood, I can see a couple streets over. I can see my house, or at least where my house is. There's all these lights. I can hear music, and I can hear my friends laughing. There's a party waiting for me in my front yard if I can just make it. And one thing that you learn never to say to an endurance athlete is you're so close. Because when you're a mile away, right? If you're just going to go run a mile, yeah, it's not a long run. But when you've done 139 miles and you still have a mile to go, but because I could hear them, I knew I was close. I was so close. And it gave me that joy and that strength. And I came down my last street and I turned on my street. And when I turned on my street, a friend of mine who's a contractor had rebuilt the Ironman finishing structure. They have this really iconic finishing structure, and they were going to ship it out, but it was like $50,000 to ship it. So they decided against that. Yeah. It was something crazy. So a buddy of mine replicated it, took up the entire street. There's a red carpet. There's finishing shoot. And on both sides, we've got 100 friends that are cheering me on. And I get to run through this channel of support down a red carpet. And when I looked up at the finish line, my wife and daughter were holding the finishing tape, and they had a little sign that said, there's no place like the finish line. And my house is to the right, all my friends. But once I saw them, everything blurred out. It was just me and them. And I floated to them. And after 14 hours, 140 miles, I did it. I actually crossed the finish line. I was reunited with my family. And then I got to finish what I started. Gave my wife a kiss and flowers, and I got down on my knee and I looked at my daughter, Hero, and I said, Hero, if I can do it, you can do it. Because we serve the same God who's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And he delights in demonstrating his strength through our weakness. And I told her, I said, listen, honey, God is going to put dreams in your heart. He's going to put a calling on your life. Do not be surprised when your enemy knocks you down. But you hold on to the hope of Jesus. In his strength, get back up, stay strong, press on, and you will experience for yourself, honey, that anything is possible with God. And that's why I did it. All of it didn't count. It was that moment that counted. Everything else supported that moment, but it was the ability to say that to her, and not just to say it to her, but to show her that resilient faith allows the impossible to be made possible with God.
Man, I really appreciate you going into all that detail. I literally at different points was like, I felt like I was there. Like I felt like I saw the cops showing the spotlight on you, playing the music, saying that you can do it, getting you there. I really appreciate you going into all that detail. And the subtitle of your book is Building a Resilient Faith for a Resilient Life. So we'll make this the last question of the day. So you've already set up this life where I think there's another quote from the book that, there's strength in the attempt. And so you had kind of became okay with the fact that I'm going to at least attempt this, but you didn't just attempt it. You accomplished it. You had a tremendous amount of support. You had literally hundreds of people supporting you across, the pathway from soup to nuts to on this journey. You get across the finish line. Your wife and daughter are there. That's going to be the picture. That's going to be the artwork for the show. Just an absolutely fantastic, amazing thing. But talk to me just in general about living a resilient life, because Jay, I know you know this in your work as a pastor, but just being a dude, we're surrounded by people that have no resilience in their bodies or in their souls whatsoever. That if anything gets difficult, they tap. If anything gets difficult, they quit. If it even seems like it might be difficult, they're not even going to try and attempt it. And we have this horrific problem, especially with our youth, that, there's a lot of daughters out there, Jay, that don't have dads like you that are going through cancer treatment and doing this crazy stuff and, giving that message to your daughter that, hey, if I can do it, you can do it too. And I lament for our culture that we're in this place where resilience is seen as a terrible thing and how it's somehow, tied into toxic masculinity because we live in a parallel universe where everything is completely stupid. And so it's like, just talk to me a little bit about the importance of just resilience, not just in the extreme scenarios of brain cancer and Ironman triathlons, but just the day to day of getting through life and getting to the finish line that God has for us.
Yeah. Life is hard.
Yeah.
Life is hard. There is no escaping life being hard. And that's why I opened the book with that question, why me? Because you also have to ask, why not me? Because life is hard. We're all going to go through it. But what I've learned is the obstacles that are in front of us don't need to stop us, because the obstacles in front of us actually hold opportunity. And the obstacles in front of us, we may not have the strength to overcome them. There's a lot of, slogans in the cancer world, like, I kicked cancer's ass or whatever. And the truth is, no, my body is not strong enough to beat a terminal disease, but my God is. My God is, and he loves to display his strength through our weakness, because then it is so obviously his strength, not ours. And that's what glorifies God. And so I have found that with every obstacle that's in our way, we have an opportunity to love someone else and to bring glory to God. And that creates a meaningful, purpose-filled life, the type of life I want to live. Because at the end of it, who cares how long you live if you're not really living? And it's the obstacles that give us the opportunities to live a meaningful life if we don't give up. If we don't give up. And part of it is giving up on hope. And that's why I told my daughter, I said, life is going to knock you down, but hold on to the hope of Jesus. And in his strength, get up and press on. Because once we let go of hope, once we think that God is against us, not working all things for the good of those who love him, when we think that he's against us, we let go of that hope, we blame him, it's over. We don't have enough strength. But if we hold on to the hope and we have resilient faith, then now we have access, no matter how weak we are or we feel, we have access to a divine strength that will allow us to overcome whatever obstacle is in our way and find amazing opportunities along the way to love and glorify God.
Man, this has been such a refreshing interview for me, because, man, I've talked to so many people this year, Jay, that have walked through the valley of the shadow of death. They had something come up and it's just like, oh my gosh, how are you going to get through this? And one of the ways that we can galvanize our own energy and our own resilience is by seeing resilience in other people. That's why it seems like it was going to suck so bad to go run that race by yourself, because that was just like an extra layer of suck on top of the other, levels of suck that you knew was already going to be there. And so just an absolutely fantastic message. I really, really appreciate you coming on today, but that is all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
Yeah, I just want to point out with the book, I Am Weak, I Am Strong, it is story driven. like you said, you need to see examples of resilience to know that you can do it yourself. But it's not a memoir. It really is a field guide to resilience. So as a pastor, I've always used story to teach, and I use this driving story to teach how to be resilient. So yes, it's an example of resilience, but it also gets very, very practical. And so if somebody is going through a hard time, or they know somebody else that needs a little extra kick of resilience, this will be helpful for them. But also for anyone who has a large calling on their life, if they want to do big things in this world's going to knock you down. There's an enemy that's going to stop you from doing good things. And so it's good to know going into it what you're about to face, and that you can get through it using these techniques. And so the book provides those things, and I hope it'll bring a lot of hope and resilience into this world.
For sure. Very good. Jay Hewitt, thank you for coming on Undaunted.Life, a Man's podcast.
Thanks so much, Kyle. Appreciate you, bro.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed my time with Jay Hewitt, but before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So I've got 2 links for you today. I've got a link to where you can go and buy your own copy of I Am Weak, I Am Strong, and also a link to Jay's website so you can keep up with everything he has going on over there. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.